Hello and welcome to ST Connect. I'm Bhagyashree Gareka, the Straits Times foreign editor. In this special edition of ST Connect, today we're hosting Malaysia's Finance Minister, Tengku Zafrul Aziz. He's joining us from his office in Kuala Lumpur. Welcome, Minister, and congratulations on your reappointment to the Cabinet. This is Minister Zafrul Aziz's second turn as Finance Minister. He was first appointed to the job last year by then Prime Minister Muhyiddin. And prior to that, he's had a stellar career in investment banking. He's also been a celebrity judge in corporate reality show in Malaysia. He runs marathons and he does yoga. In sum, he's a very fit 48-year-old. Minister, I just want to note that you gave the Straits Times an interview in 2017 to my colleague Ravi Vellore, and you told him that you did not see yourself having a political career. Yet here we are. Also with us today from KL is our Malaysia Bureau Chief, Shannon Teo. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Bhagia. Hi, Minister.
And here in the Straits Times studio with me in Singapore is OCBC Bank's Chief Economist and Head of Treasury Research and Strategy, Selina Ling.
Hi, Minister. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Selina. Thank you, Minister. You've taken time out for us in the middle of your budget preparations. We have a round of questions for you, and we hope we can also take in some questions from our audience. We got these solicited in advance. So let me get the ball rolling with an issue that must be at the foremost of your mind, and indeed, which is at the top of minds for finance ministers across the world, basically COVID-19 support. Can you give us an overview? How much has Malaysia spent on COVID recovery? What has the impact been? Which schemes have been most useful?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Baya, Shannon and Selina. And of course, warm hello to all Straits Times readers out there, particularly those who have prepared their tough questions for me. I'm honored to be here having this conversation with all of you about Malaysia, particularly its growth prospects moving forward. So first off, I'd like to start off by saying that I believe with recent developments, investors can expect better political stability in Malaysia. More importantly, the fact that many ministers have been reappointed shows that the current PM is focused on continuity, particularly as we are still facing COVID challenges. Ministers for key ministries such as finance, international trade, economy, and education are maintained. Health is now being led by Khairi Jamaluddin, who coordinated the national vaccination program. The current public health challenges provide a short runway for our pandemic exit plans, and as such, maintaining the leadership in key ministries, I believe, is a smart thing to do. In fact, for the week ending 27th August, the markets appreciated the signs of stability. We saw the ringgit strengthening against the US dollar by 1.7%. Our FDM KLCI has increased by more than 5%, with close to 1 billion ringgit in foreign net inflows. Secondly, I would like to touch on Malaysia's economic fundamentals. Recently, we announced our second quarter 2021 GDP growth, which expanded by 16.1% year on year in the second quarter of this year. This indicates a continued recovery trajectory. Monthly growth in April was actually 40.1% and May was 19.8%, recovering strongly. Growth was also supported by the implementation of stimulus and assistance packages throughout the period, complemented by ongoing measures under Budget 2021. I must also share that despite several headwinds due to the resurgence of COVID-19 cases towards the end of the second quarter, various key economic indicators reflected encouraging signs of recovery. So this includes the second quarter data point, such as our industrial production index was up 1.4%. Sales value for the manufacturing sector was up 6.5% to around 124.4 billion ringgit. Revenue of the services sector was up 20.5%. That's around about 404.5 billion ringgit. Exports was up 27.2%, and total trade was up 29.3%. So our policies have also contributed to a stable banking system featuring healthy levels of liquidity and funding profile. Agencies and up 9.1 billion second quarter. So we look at investments, particularly from Singapore, Japan, and Indonesia, and the US, were channeled mainly into the manufacturing, financial, and insurance takaful activities, as well as mining and quarrying. In fact, Singapore is still the top FDI contributor to Malaysia. Investors' top concerns usually center around three main areas. I think all of you are aware of this. Obviously, firstly, political stability. Secondly, macroeconomic stability. This includes policies to get the economy back on track for the short, medium, and long term. And finally, our legal and regulatory environment, including the resilience and policies of Malaysia's capital markets. Thus far, I believe, in my view, we have fared well on this matrix. For example, foreign investors have remained confident in the ringgit bond market. Net inflows in excess of 24 billion ringgit in the first half of this year. Overall, investors' confidence has remained intact, attributed to Malaysia's sovereign rating, which was reaffirmed, which were reaffirmed by S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. And a long list of investors firmly validates Malaysia's attractiveness as an investment destination, including most recently Porsche, as well as ATNS, which is Austria's ATNS, for about 8.5 billion ringgit investment in Kedah, its first production plant in Southeast Asia, to manufacture high-end printed circuit boards and integrated circuit subs. And Malaysia remains committed to supporting foreign investors, particularly those who add value to Malaysia's economic pillars beyond job creation, such as nurturing Malaysian talent and companies toward becoming global players. Of course, we are in the midst of preparing our budget 2022 for the first time. As part of the effort to improve the annual budget process, the Ministry of Finance has published a pre-budget statement for budget 2022. This also provides a preliminary overview on the direction, approach, and expected benefits for budget 2022. This also provides, this will be crafted based on three main themes. Themes are recovery, resilience, and reform. So under recovery, the budget 2022 is aimed at driving the national recovery process to ensure that the nation successfully exits from the COVID-19 crisis, as well as continue the post-crisis recovery agenda to help lives, livelihoods, and badly affected economic sectors. Under resilience, we will rebuild the resilience and capacity of the nation's public health system, enhancing digital and technological infrastructure, facilitating the nation's transition to high productivity industrial sectors. It's important that we work on becoming more agile and sustainable to ensure that we are always prepared for any shocks or eventualities. So under reform, Budget 2022 will ensure that reform measures are implemented in alignment with our 12th Malaysia Plan, while focusing on embracing as many of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, as possible. Our reform agenda includes those under the recently announced refreshed mandate for our government-linked investment companies, our GLICs, to achieve key outcomes such as future-proofing them, as well as strengthening social safeguards and the GLIC's fiscal resilience. So Malaysia's economy is expected to gradually recover under the National Immunization Program. It's being accelerated as we speak. Globally, Malaysia is currently one of the fastest nations in administering vaccines, averaging 400,000 doses daily. As at 31st August, our Independence Day, 64% of Malaysia's adult population have been fully vaccinated. We are confident that at least 80% of adult population will be fully vaccinated earlier than the target of end of October this year. So moving forward, what can we look at when it comes to growth prospects, how we can support the growth prospects? We have implemented stimulus and assistance packages valued at 530 billion ringgit, complemented by Budget 2021 worth 322.5 billion ringgit. And from these packages, more than 300 billion ringgit is still available for the rest of the year, which is expected to support economic recovery. So far, 200 billion has been disbursed from the various packages, benefiting more than 20 million Malaysians and 2.4 million businesses since March 2020. So other factors that will drive Malaysia's economic recovery include improving external demand, as well as recovery in commodity prices and infrastructure projects, which obviously has a high multiplier impact. And this all will support Malaysia's economic fundamentals, which have remained resilient even during these difficult times. Manufacturing sector and exports are also expected to benefit from the current thriving global demand for E&E products, hydrocarbons such as crude oil and natural gas, as well as PPE or personal protective equipment. So with all these factors combined, the GDP growth for this year, for 2021, we have announced recently is expected to be between 3 to 4%. I must say, however, that we remain vigilant of the country's economic growth. There are still risks and uncertainties from both domestic and global economic factors, like the spread of new COVID-19 variants that may delay the reopening of some of the sectors. But disruptions of COVID-19 vaccine supplies will also hamper our plans to inoculate the significant proportion of the population. But I'm pleased to say that we have enough supply for the rest of the year. So, and if you look at the outlook for the third quarter of this year, it may be challenging due to the prolonged phase one for several states, but we have just announced a number of states are opening up. Different new SOPs have been introduced. We hope this will then cushion somewhat the ease of restriction for fully vaccinated people. Anyway, let me just quickly go to the outlook. The outlook of the fourth quarter is brighter. We expect a gradual recovery from the reopening of more economic and social sectors as more people are vaccinated. This will also reduce the burden of the healthcare system through the lower hospitalization and ICU admissions. So currently, efforts are underway to move towards the reform stage with the recently launched National Fourth Industrial Revolution, the fourth IR. Digitalization and technological adoption will be a national priority for boosting Malaysia's long-term economic prospects. This is also in line with the government's ongoing medium-term reforms through initiatives such as the NIA, which is our National Investment Aspiration Framework, and the Perkukuh Pelaburan Rakyat Initiative, which is our JLIC transformation plan. Reforms also will be mentioned within the context of the 12th Malaysia Plan, which is our next blueprint for socio-economic inclusivity and sustainable growth. Our current top priority is to protect lives from the threat of COVID-19 and ensure the country's economic growth prospects remain strong in the medium to longer term, guided by our recovery plan. So whatever our strategic and proactive responses may be under this challenging COVID-19 environment, we are also aiming to minimize permanent economic scarring from the crisis. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Difficult circumstances and some encouraging policies that we look forward to. You made a mention of your pre-budget statement that's been released. Selina,
Yes.
Would you have some comments to share on that?
Sure, Minister. Actually, I read with very great interest the pre-budget statement. I was just wondering, because a lot of the assumptions in the pre-budget statement pertains to the expected recovery in the fourth quarter and going out into 2022. And that would really be very dependent on the COVID situation becoming under control. We note that basically the nationwide cases still remains relatively high, even though there are some signs of improvement in the Klang Valley. So can you share with us the thinking of the new cabinet as far as the reopening timeline is concerned? And what are some of the parameters that you will use going into that reopening of the economy as well?
Thank you. Yes, well, I just actually attended our National Security Council meeting to discuss the opening up of the economy. And we've seen most recently the number of cases in terms of, we have now categorized the cases at category 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, where category 3 to 4 and 5 is actually about 1% of the total number of cases, which are category 3, 4, and 5 are those that require hospital treatment, ICU and ventilators. And if we've seen the numbers are also going down in terms of our people who needs to go to ICU, and 99% is in category 1 and 2. When we look at the pre-budget statement, as I mentioned earlier, is our national. When we released it on Merdeka Day, it's actually the first in a nation's history. And coming back, but let me talk a bit more about the opening up. So we are now under the National Recovery Plan. There are a number of states who have moved to different phases, and the thing is, there are three indicators that we look at. One being the number of cases in category 3, 4, and 5. Secondly, is our capacity to respond, our healthcare capacity to respond, and finally is the vaccination rate. Two out of the three have been achieved. By most states. In fact, all states have at least 40% of adult population being vaccinated. The challenge here is to ensure that we have enough capacity when it comes to capacity to respond, which is one of the proxy to that is the number of ICU beds available. So those will be the key criteria as we open up more. But we have seen as we are progressively moving many states to higher phases. Back to the pre-budget statement, like I said, it's our national first in nation history. The reason why we did this is in line with our objective to improve governance, transparency, and accountability, especially when it comes to the country's fiscal management. I mentioned earlier just now as well that the budget will be crafted based on three objectives: recovery, resilience, and reform. In short, the measures, initiatives, and efforts will revolve around the national recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. So back to the National Recovery Plan, where we want to rebuilding of the national resilience, and also have the focus to catalyze reform. So the first theme, which is protecting and driving recovery of lives and livelihood, which is important because we feel that the budget next year must drive the national recovery process to ensure that Malaysia successfully exits from the COVID-19 crisis, as well as continue the post-crisis recovery agenda to help lives, livelihood, and of course, badly affected economic sectors. So effort to help the vulnerable groups and generate new jobs opportunities will continue to be prioritized. Tourism and retail, obviously, the most badly affected economic sectors that Ministry of Finance will prioritize right up there with generating new jobs, which has thus been far tackled through the National Employment Council, which was set up a year ago. We will also focus on helping the vulnerable and disadvantaged segments of society, women, indigenous people, and the disabled, to ensure no one is left behind in the nation's development and recovery agenda. There's a second one, as you said, you read the pre-budget statement. The second theme is about rebuilding national resilience. So this budget 2022 will emphasize on rebuilding the resilience and capacity of the nation's public health system, enhancing digital and technology infrastructure, and also facilitating the nation's transition to high productivity industrial sectors. This is, of course, based on automation and high skills. Additionally, we will also evaluate means to rebuild fiscal resilience, which was affected by the high level of government commitments required to finance the government aid and stimulus packages to the people and businesses. And this is obviously done by many other countries. And finally, on reforms, efforts will be aligned to the objective of the 12th Malaysia Plan. This will be tabled in the Parliament soon. Parliament will be opening on 13th of September. And as much as possible, the United Nations SDGs. So budget measures execution will be underscored by the Keluarga Malaysia principle, which was announced by our Prime Minister. So through the pre-budget statement and the stakeholder engagement efforts, we will not only enhance transparency on our budget preparation process, but also provide avenues for stakeholders to share their ideas and feedback. So we want to formulate a budget that is well aligned to the needs of Malaysians, as well as the country's policies and the national objectives. So among other things, when talking about reform, we want to improve the efficiency of the public delivery system and embed into it the ESG, our environment, social and governance elements in public service, statutory bodies, and also the government-linked companies. And finally, we have also highlighted the importance of civil society organizations in our pre-budget statement as one of the government's partners in addressing various issues on the ground, especially in matters such as poverty eradication, livelihood, and improving the people's socio-economic well-being. So this effort reflects our determination to develop a more sustainable and inclusive economy, which will be for a point of attraction, I hope, for investors.
It seems like the upcoming budget is going to be spurring recovery, resilience, and reform. Given that there will be a fair bit of expenditure growth, could you share with us where you see the statutory debt levels, for instance, going by the end of this year or into 2022 itself? And what are the chances that the debt ceiling ratio will be raised from the current 60%? And in your view, where would the ideal new ceiling be? And what do you think would be the response from some of the rating agencies to this new ceiling, for instance?
Yes. As you are aware, the current limit is around, it is at 60%. And if you remember when I presented, when I tabled the budget in Parliament last November, even budget 2022, if you remember, the target deficit was 3.2%. And when we came in 2020, we announced various packages which resulted in a spending that increased, in fact, doubled the deficit to 6.2%. And when we tabled the budget 2021 in November last year, we had a target deficit of 5.4%. And given that in this year, in 2021, the crisis actually was worse in terms of number of cases, and in terms of the impact of the economy, we have allowed the deficit to increase beyond 6%. In fact, I have came out publicly to say that our expectation now this year, the deficit will be around 6.5%. So with this, obviously, our statutory debt will closely approach the limit of 60%, and in fact, it could be even above that. So in terms of government expenditure growth, it will be along the three key priorities of Budget 2022, as I mentioned before. And we are, if should the debt to GDP number goes up above 60%, we will be going to Parliament to increase it to 65%, especially when we know that the various packages that we've introduced, and again, dependent on the GDP number at the end of the day, may require us to go to the Parliament to increase it to 65%. But if you ask me, I think we will have to go to Parliament to ensure that it's increased from 60 to 65% in terms of the ceiling.
Thank you, Minister. Shannon, you've been following the Minister very closely for about a year now. What struck you most in everything he said so far?
Well, I think that he's been consistent in terms of the plans that he's come up with. We know that it was quite unfortunate that when he was sworn in March last year, we immediately went into this COVID pandemic, and that was what was right in front of him. So, I mean, for me, the question that I think not just that I have, but maybe a lot of Malaysians have, is that, as he's mentioned, there is this continuity, right? There's a cabinet now, which is made up largely of a lot of the senior ministers from the last government. But does this mean that we're expecting to see very similar themes, very similar priorities under the new government, under the Ismail Sabri government? Because I'm sure you can appreciate, Minister, there are a lot of people who are looking at this government as Perikatan Nasional 2.0. It's not just the same MPs, it's not just the same parties, but as we discussed, a very similar cabinet. Or are we going to see new things, new priorities, new themes? You talk about 12 Malaysia plan coming up next month. Is there going to be something surprising? And if you can tease us with some of these surprises, I'm still a newsman, so I like the good scoop.
Thank you, Shannon. Can I respond? Or
yeah,
please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, the two key words here is the two C's for me in the new government. It's about continuity and it's about consistency. So in the past 17 months, we have been focusing on COVID-19 management in both saving lives and livelihood, and this will continue. So the focus of the government and of course our here at Ministry of Finance have been to provide the necessary allocation for different components of service delivery. So public health and economy. This is to fight the pandemic and directly to the businesses and people whose livelihoods have been affected. So that is what I talk about, continuity and also consistency. Since the most recent stimulus package was launched, the government had already started to focus on the overall recovery aspects for Malaysia. So we understand, okay, that the COVID situation is dynamic. We didn't realize in 2020 what will happen in 2021, and we hope that with vaccination at least, we know that 2022 has to be and can be and should be a recovery year. But the situation remains fluid, and that's why we have to plan and pace ourselves. So this new government here is clear that the strategy has to be clear from the onset, that the more people we fully vaccinated, or the more people we fully vaccinate, the more lives are protected, the lesser the strain will be on our healthcare system. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in the Greater Klang Valley, in the Klang Valley itself, in Sarawak, in Labuan, and various other states where we've seen high level of vaccination. So in turn, more economic and social sectors can operate, and the faster we get to the new normal and living with the virus, in terms of new themes and priorities, Shannon, this government will build on what we've done in the past 17 months. That's my view, and I believe that's the view of my colleagues from the first cabinet meeting that we had yesterday, which is really directly assisting people and businesses who have been affected to get back to normalcy systematically and safely. Nonetheless, we recognize, of course, there are challenges ahead, are tough. Recovery will not be smooth or even, and we've seen this not just in Malaysia but in other countries. So focus on key enablers will be there. We need to focus on key enablers that can nurture growth. 3 areas that will receive special focus will be, firstly, strengthening our healthcare system and respond for future pandemics, as well as strategic industries related to healthcare. Secondly, digitalization and technology, especially through the rollout of critical infrastructure, for example, being 5G. And of course, the thirdly, which I mentioned many times before, is on the green economy and sustainability.
Did you have a follow-up, Shannon?
Sri, if I can just follow up on that, just on that point about this government being so similar to the previous government. But you made a statement earlier about how that the market is showing its belief in this government stability, that we have cleared this political crisis and put it behind us. But can you explain in your own words, why should the public and the market be more positive on this government stability? We mentioned the makeup is very, very similar. Why is it that we should be moving ahead from here with the belief that this government will be more stable? Can we expect a decent runway for government plans, for MOF programs to take root, instead of this question of elections might be held anytime soon? It could be this quarter, next quarter. People were having this kind of anxiety over maybe, in fact, for a year up until this recent change of government.
Yeah. Well, Shannon, I wish I had the answer to that question. Like I said, situation remains fluid all over the world on the pandemic, and for Malaysia specifically, the Prime Minister has announced Keluarga Malaysia. He wants to be inclusive. We're engaging all parties, not just in the budget, but he's also mentioned that he has officially invited opposition members to join the National Recovery Council and various other important councils that's under the government. So we hope that going forward, this plan to be more inclusive will then ensure that some of the policies and plans, initiatives that we have in store will be sustainable. We'll never know, right? But if you look at this, let's look at it this way. Like you said, many ministers have been reappointed. That, to me, in my own words, and I've been using all my own words, by the way, Shannon, that the current Prime Minister is focused on continuity, particularly in facing COVID challenges. I mentioned before about some of the key ministries. And we look at the political leaders, which is my second point, is political leaders must strive for political stability. As we know, political turbulence is too costly for our economy and impacts investor confidence in the short term, medium term, and also long term. But more importantly, we must also regain the confidence of Malaysians on the government's exit strategy from the pandemic. So we must, like what the Prime Minister said in his maiden speech, work together as a family, or Keluarga Malaysia, and the Prime Minister stressed as well that he has reached out to leaders of the opposition. In fact, the first week in office, there was a joint statement with all the opposition leaders. So I'm optimistic that together with the other opposition politicians, we will work together to support the nation's recovery and build a more resilient, sustainable future for all. Right. So I think these prospects have been reflected in recent positive sentiments in the capital and financial markets. And now the focus is on execution. So the Prime Minister has talked about the 100-day plan, right? The cabinet members will continue to work harder to ensure that all plans are executed well for the people. For us at MOF, just like Budget 2021, we will strive to consult as many parties as possible in preparing Budget 2022, as what I've mentioned before. In fact, we have started the stakeholder engagement already, and we will look at how to get feedback, what can be included in our recovery, resilient, reform budget. I'm optimistic, Shannon, that a safe passage for Budget 2022 will be created, and the government is given ample space and support to navigate through these tough terrains in the short to medium term for Malaysia's economic recovery.
Minister, on the pre-budget statement, I wanted to tap your brains because last year everyone recognized it was a pandemic year. So governments had a lot of leeway to basically throw unprecedented fiscal assistance to help people. But given that 2022 is going to be a year of more stable recovery, I think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on how governments are actually boosting their fiscal resources, even though expenditure needs remain very high. So I wanted to ask you a few points. There has been some consideration of GST as an additional revenue source. So is there a rethink about the possibility of a GST on this front? And last but not least, on the banking sector side, a lot of calls to basically expand the loans moratorium scheme. Some thoughts on this as well?
Yes, this is a favorite question whenever I meet the analysts and economists, and it's also something that we at in Ministry of Finance are looking at. We're still reviewing the feasibility of reintroducing GST, but I firmly believe that the timing is not right at this stage, not in the middle of an economic crisis, in the middle of a pandemic, given that we do not want to choke the already fragile growth prospects due to the pandemic. On loan moratoriums, we just recently announced under Pemulih that we are assisting, banks are assisting those SMEs who have been affected with a 6-month moratorium. And it's still ongoing, and there is also discussions between the individuals, vulnerable individuals, especially the B40, where banks have agreed to also give their support when it comes to moratorium. But I believe that you have to look at this in totality. Our initiative that look at loan moratorium must be also looked at the support that given in terms of hiring subsidies. There's also the withdrawal of EPF to help some of that. And there's, like I said, more than 200 billion ringgit has been disbursed from the various packages. So we hope that this will have a positive impact as well, especially as we gradually open up the economy. But having said that, when it comes to loan moratorium, those industries that are still affected, I believe, and I think the banks should continue to give as much assistance as possible. Already, as we speak today, I believe that compared to other countries, the banks in Malaysia, when we did a benchmarking exercise, have done a lot more than other banks in other countries.
Thank you. I think Malaysians will be very happy to hear that GST is not on the cards for this upcoming budget.
In fact,
not for my Ministry of Finance colleagues, though.
Thank you, Minister.
In fact, we had quite a few questions related to GST. And since we're talking about taxes, there's another question from a reader that I'd like to just jump in with. And this reader is PJ George from Singapore. And he's asking you, can Malaysia reduce its corporate tax to say 15% over the next 5 years? I think the idea might be with a view to foreign investment, attracting foreign investment.
I see. Okay. Well, if you look at corporate income tax, actually, it does represent a big chunk of our federal government revenue. It represents approximately 32.8% of the federal government revenue. But this one, you include the petroleum income tax. So, and given the widening fiscal deficit, I've talked about the fiscal deficit that we expect it to be around 6.5% this year, and due to the pandemic, Malaysia, I believe, is not in the position at this stage to afford a tax rate cut. One of the main problems have been in our narrow tax base, right? You mentioned about GST, and now we don't have that. Until we can broaden our tax base and maintain a stronger than average growth trajectory, then we can consider a cut in corporate tax. However, given you talk about the investments that attractive rate of tax rate will allow more investment to the country, but given the competitive nature for investments, I think business can move up to lower tax jurisdiction. You said that, but Malaysia, so therefore, in the future may need at some point to review the corporate tax structure to realign with broader economic goals in the medium term. We must remember that the global trends are favoring lower corporate taxes, which is what your reader has highlighted. Our neighboring countries are mostly lower than Malaysia for corporate income tax. Singapore, for example, 17%, the lowest in this region, I believe. Vietnam, Thailand is about, Cambodia also is about 20%, Indonesia at 22%. So we have one of the highest rates in ASEAN. Having said that, the other point that we must factor in, this is a key point, is that tax rate and incentives are not the only component that attracts investments. There are other key factors that is important when it comes to attracting investments. Good infrastructure, high quality human resource, and talent pool, clear regulations being some of those that are key when it comes to attracting investors.
Thank you. I think Shannon, you're on.
Yeah, if I can just chime in with one thing that is related to that. A number of analysts, when I speak to them, they always ask me, hey, so what do you think the fiscal consolidation trajectory will be like? I've done my best to guess, but I'm kind of done guessing. I have the finance minister in front of me right now. So, dear finance minister, how do you foresee our deficit trajectory in the medium term? We come back to it that the 12 Malaysia plan will be tabled next month, right? And development expenditure is a big component of any Malaysia plan. So surely we have some idea about our balance sheet up to 2025 at least, right? That's when the Malaysia plan expires, every 5-year plan. So in this 3 or 4 years that is coming up, in this 3 or 4 years worth of budgets, are we going to see a fiscal consolidation? Because I think that was underway, but COVID happened, right? And so we had to readjust our targets. But are we going to see deficits coming down again?
Yes. Shannon, 2022 will be a recovery year. If we look at our horizon up to 2025, there will definitely be fiscal consolidation. We need to ensure that we go back to the levels that we are been before, between 3 to 4%, and that is the plan, but not in 2022, right? Because in the recovery year, it's important that we do not pull the support, the fiscal expansion support that is given to the economy too early. And we've learned this from what happened in the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. If you pull the support too early, the economies, those economies have been affected. So in the medium term, there is a medium term framework we're looking at. We are looking at ensuring that fiscal consolidation does happen. So we need to be fiscally responsible as a government, given the limited space we have and the resources. So we will continue to ensure that fiscal prudence is there, but at the same time to ensure that we continue to support the economy. We've shown our boldness in a way to look at further spending as and when the country needs it. But as the economy open up, as the country, in terms of the GDP growth improves, we will definitely move towards a consolidation phase, a fiscal consolidation phase.
You mentioned, Minister, you just mentioned Singapore. So I'll bring this question from a reader again, from Ivan in Singapore. who says, what will define your government's economic relations with Singapore post-COVID?
Thank you. Well, Singapore is our dear neighbor. I hope I can go back there one day to go to Singapore once this COVID situation improves. Bilateral relations will continue to flourish under the new Prime Minister. You've seen it by the recent phone call after the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister was sworn in, as well as a call by Prime Minister Lee to the former Prime Minister as well. So we will continue to work closely and strategically across all economic fronts. We've got many friends there, myself in Singapore. We'll continue to enhance trade ties, and we welcome, the strong flow of investments by Singapore into Malaysia. And we've seen this, Singapore being consistently one of the top contributors of FDI, especially first quarter this year, where total approved investments, we saw Singapore coming in, or committing to 43.1 billion ringgit.
Minister, actually, when some of my friends heard that I'll be on this panel with you, they were very excited. They said the first question I must ask you is really when we're going to open the travel lanes between Singapore and Malaysia, because a lot of Malaysians working in Singapore haven't seen their family members for quite a while as well. So any light on that front?
I don't have the answer to that, I'm sorry. But of course, for me, the sooner the better. But obviously, we need to consult the relevant stakeholders, Ministry of Foreign Affairs being one, but more importantly, both governments, the Ministry of Health, on how we can slowly and safely open the borders between the two countries.
Minister, maybe if I take one step back, you spoke quite a bit about the need to incorporate ESG components into the budget and into the public sector as well. And we all know that globally the sustainability agenda has gotten quite a lot of attention as well. So I know that Petronas actually announced that it will achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Any plans for Malaysia as a country with regards to a similar carbon neutrality target date? And what are some of the fiscal costs that may be attached to Malaysia's fight against climate change as well?
Yep, thank you. Well, firstly, there has been a lot of work dedicated in different parts of governments towards pursuing the sustainability agenda over the past few years. And Ministry of Finance is also doing its part towards supporting this front, along with the Central Bank, Bank Negara, Securities Commission, our stock exchange, Bursa, especially regards to policies and measures in the financial sector, right? Nonetheless, I believe that one of the major challenges in Malaysia, which presents an opportunity for us, is to come up with a stronger, more holistic and specific policy on carbon neutrality. As we have that in our 11th Malaysian plan, which allocated about 7.24 billion ringgit to enhance climate resilience and adaptation measures. And this is something that we will pursue further in the 12th Malaysia Plan, especially under the environmental sustainability pillar. As I'm sure you're aware, Malaysia is one of the nations that is party to the Paris Agreement, and in August this year, we recently improved our nationally determined contribution, or NDCs, right, to reduce the intensity of greenhouse gas, the GHG emissions, by 45% by 2030. Unconditionally, and this is an improvement of 10% of our initial NDC in 2015. Our national adaptation plan is also being developed to ensure climate change adaptation is mainstream into Malaysia's development plans. Of course, we need to work harder to meet and even surpass the goals we have set. The other challenge remains increasing awareness, and encouraging awareness within the government and businesses even to commit unconditionally to carbon neutrality. As it is, more Malaysian corporations have clearer targets. You mentioned Petronas just now. Petronas has set carbon neutrality targets, pledge net zero. And this aspiration is by 2050. Our national utility company, electricity company, Tenaga Nasional, also declared that this one of their facilities that's fully commissioned in 2019, I believe is the Jimah electricity generation facility, will be the last new coal-fired power plant in Malaysia, and it will retire in 2033. My previous firm, CIMB, also committed to phase out coal from its portfolio by 2040, and it was commitment when I was there. So when I was, when I was there, we always have been saying this. When I was in the financial sector, we have always been saying that we must find ways to green the financial system and finance the green. And this is something I would personally like to see through in Malaysia in my tenure as the Minister of Finance. So the fiscal cost of transition, the one you raised just now, obviously is immense. We have to start. We have to start somewhere. Yeah, and it's better to start sooner rather than later. There is a lot at stake, not just the ecological impact of climate change, also the repercussions towards trade and business. And as a trading nation, Malaysia being a trading nation, we can ill afford this adverse impact on our reputation. So as we grapple with economic recovery post-pandemic, we are presented with an opportunity to strengthen our policy framework on environment, climate change, and sustainability.
Over to you, Shannon.
Well, I don't have anything to add on climate change, but it's also related, right? You talk about SDG and ESG funds, right? And that is part of the question about investment and investor confidence. When these funds want to look for things to invest in, right? They have these parameters and benchmarks that they have to meet. So in the short term, right, we're looking at investor confidence, we're looking at FDI. 2020 maybe wasn't a year where Malaysia drew glowing reviews on its FDI record. So, and now we have some new policies like the MM2H new guidelines, which a lot of people are saying are too restrictive. And I understand that the Home Affairs Ministry has already said that it's going to review the new guidelines. But what else is MOF within your purview that can be done in the short term to really kind of spark this investment climate, whether it's in terms of ESG or in other ways? I appreciate that the purse strings are a bit tight right now in terms of kind of fiscal levers. It's a bit difficult. But what else can we do?
Well, thank you, Shannon. Let me just touch quickly on the first point you raised about investor confidence. I can't disagree with you. It has been severely affected by the pandemic and to some extent, obviously, the domestic political situation. But despite all this, we have recorded a much better investment inflow, especially when it comes to FDI, in the first half of 2021 compared to the first half of 2020. So if you look as our vaccination goals are met and more economic sectors are open, we are expecting improved investment outlook generally. So Malaysia is still a preferred investment choice due to its well-developed investment ecosystem and the institutionalization of public service delivery by a capable public sector. So additionally, what is important, what is equally important and sometimes not looked at is the direct domestic investments, which is the DDI, which we continue to emphasize on. We also had a hit when we look at certain sectors, which is very critical segment of the global supply chain, such as E&E, including the medical devices and the automotive sector. So examples which are a testament to Malaysia's global FDI appeal. We have mentioned about Austria, AT&S, I mentioned about Porsche. Recently, what you talk about what MOF can do. MOF, we have a company called Penjana Capital, which was set up to operationalize a government fund matching initiative in the startup space. And well, it has successfully raised 850 million ringgit for its first close as at end of May this year. Of the total raise, 433 million ringgit, or over 55%, was from foreign investors, including from Hong Kong, South Korea, and Singapore. With regards to the MM2H guidelines, yes, you're right. The Home Ministry are looking at it. I think there are many feedback that we receive from relevant stakeholders. The government will monitor the situation, and I believe it will be discussed again with the cabinet to see that ensuring that whatever decision is made is realigned with our broader economic goals for Malaysia.
Let me sneak in a quick question about the budget. And this comes from Darren Lin, who's a student in Singapore. He wants to know, will you be tapping on national reserves to fund your budget?
I have a short answer for that, Baya. The answer is no, we will not.
Okay, thank you. And another one, if I may, again related to your plans, we heard you speak about rebuilding. The question,
Yes.
and this from Dirk Sommer in Singapore again, how will the government finance the investments needed in the infrastructure to revive the economy? And basically, will you allow for a far bigger role for the private sector again?
Thank you, Baya. Well, again, it is important that government's focus, especially the fiscal focus, is on managing the pandemic and economic recovery. So, given that focus, we will have to share the burden of financing of infrastructure projects beyond what is allocated through our capital expenditure in the budget. Infrastructure spending is indeed critical, indeed critical to jumpstart the economy, especially with the big ticket spending with impactful multiplier effects. However, given, as I said, our fiscal priorities at this time is to revive to help the economy, we feel that this is the right time to revive the interest in more public-private partnership, especially for infrastructure financing. One example, if I may, is the 5G infrastructure that we are rolling out through Digital National Berhad, which is fully borne by the private sector. Other big infrastructure projects that may require private sector partnership will be something like railway projects that we will have announced recently.
Right.
Minister, actually I have a follow-up question on this fiscal consolidation strategy that you outlined up to 2025 as under the 12 Malaysia plan. Given that GST and the special voluntary disclosure programs are off the cards, thinking of the box here, because there are some other emerging economies that have undertaken debt monetization by the central government. So Indonesia, for instance, just announced that the burden sharing program will be extended into 2022. Is this something that Malaysia could consider as well?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Selina. The 5-year plan, when we look at the top line, our revenue line, we will study all options, right? I'm not saying all what you said is off the table, but for the short term, for the immediate term, yes, we are not looking at those. But coming back to debt monetization, burden sharing through debt monetization is a highly experimental policy for emerging markets. But of course, we have seen the absorption of government debt from secondary market is not uncommon. Japan, EU, US have done in the past decade. And so far, I believe Malaysia still has the flexibility on the monetary front. There's still headroom to ease monetary policy. We've seen the announcement by the central bank recently. And the market-determined exchange rate continues to function as an automatic stabilizer. Therefore, I think it will be premature to consider debt monetization at this current juncture. We have built a strong foreign exchange reserve since the 1998 crisis. Now our foreign reserve is around $111 billion US as at the end of second quarter this year. This is sufficient to finance more than 8 months of retail imports and 1.1 times total short-term external debt. We should not risk the impact that debt monetization will have on our foreign exchange as well, as potentially on inflation rates. Moreover, there is sufficient domestic liquidity in Malaysia today, and this has been shown as we fund our various stimulus packages based on the liquidity that we have here in Malaysia.
Minister, there is a slightly political question, and I hope you will be able to give us an answer. It comes from a reader in Malaysia, Jimmy Ng, and he says, Prime Minister Ismail Sabri has said that the new policy must be Malaysian first and not be based on race or ethnicity or gender. So how is your new budget going to be giving expression to this policy? How will it be free from some racial or ethnic related quotas or policies?
Yeah, well, thank you, Baya. The Prime Minister announced this concept of Keluarga Malaysia. What is Keluarga Malaysia? Keluarga Malaysia is a policy of inclusiveness and togetherness in fighting COVID-19 and working together as a nation for Malaysia's recovery. And as we are fighting COVID-19, we have proven again and again through government's actions that no one is left behind. So the budget will still maintain policies to assist targeted ethnic groups in line with our national development agenda, as it is the fundamental tenet of our socio-economic fabric. But we are also working towards building a fairer and more equitable future for all Malaysians. It is all about growing the pie, right? Growing the pie so everyone will have a larger share of the pie. And the distribution is more evenly, so we close the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, and also closing the income gaps within geographies.
Right, thank you. So I take it that policies basically are going to continue. You are speaking of a bigger pie, which probably is a very rational way to approach it as well. Thank you for that. A question again, this is from one of our readers who wants to know, will you have some specific plans to aid the hardest hit sectors? So specifically the question is about aviation, tourism, hospitalities, the SMEs, even the arts. So do you have something special for these coming up in your budget?
Thank you. Yes, those are right. Those are the sectors that are mostly the hardest hit, right? Tourism, hospitality, aviation, both domestic and international. But firstly, if we looked at the vaccination rate again, as more people get vaccinated and our vaccination targets are met, we will open up sectors such as tourism and hospitality and domestic aviation. We will be announcing soon opening up of certain islands for not just domestic but international tourism very soon. We have engaged with industry leaders, and the Ministry of Tourism has a roadmap to assist the tourism, hospitality and aviation players and revitalize these sectors as they are among the hardest hit, as you mentioned. And we at Ministry of Finance will continue to assist with direct assistance, grants, etc. So, regards to the SME, so far 6.1 billion ringgit grants have been disbursed, wage subsidies have been channeled, a moratorium extended, and there are more soft loans and matching grants offered by financial institutions under the central bank program. The other sector that was affected, I just met some of them, is the art sector. They have also been allocated grants, and we will do more to assist and get them back on their feet.
And particularly, Minister, for the local startups and SMEs. So I think they're also craving your attention. Is there something that they can look forward to in your budget next month?
Yes, they can have something to look forward to because as we open up the economy, one thing we realize when we go on the ground and speak to them is they need capital to restart their business. This is something that the government is looking at. It's not just looking at supporting them through moratoriums, but once the business have closed, especially for the micro SMEs, the small businesses, and that's registered in our database is close to 1.1 million micro SMEs. They will then require some form of capital to restart businesses that have been closed due to the pandemic.
Right. Very recently, Malaysia made headlines in a story about Facebook and Google, which were bypassing the country in the their undersea cable plan. That attracted a lot of attention. And so here's a question from one of our readers again. This is Ryan Tay, and writing to you from the US, wanting to know, is this going to be affecting Malaysia's goal to have the most undersea cable landings in Southeast Asia by 2025? And are you going to be doing something about that? About the current cabotage policy, he says, is that something you want to tinker with? Is that somehow deterring foreign investors?
Thank you. Well, Shannon would love to ask that question to our Minister of Transport, I'm sure. I'll try and give my perspective on this. So I believe there are, of course, geopolitical considerations that are weighed on by these tech giants. We've met them personally as we talked about our digital agenda here. And when you look at the tech giants, the Googles, the Facebook, when it comes to undersea cable connectivity, I cannot comment as much, but Malaysia's current cabotage policy is sufficient in ensuring our sovereignty. And if cabotage policy is an issue, then if you look at our other countries, neighboring countries, like Indonesia being one example, has a far stricter cabotage policy. And yet some of these big tech names are still in Indonesia. As per the digital infrastructure and investments in data center, Malaysia is confident in its ability to attract global players in building data centers in Malaysia, as proven by Microsoft's $1 billion investment in Malaysia announced earlier this year. And we believe, and I know for a fact, there are more global players which are finalizing similar investments in Malaysia, which we will announce soon under the My Digital initiative.
Thank you. We really look forward to more announcements on that score from Malaysia. Selina and Shannon, if you have any more questions, we can have the Minister.
Just related on digital transformation and policy. I mean, Malaysia is, I think this year we started really getting the ball rolling on 5G, right? We've tendered it out to Ericsson, and we are really looking at rolling it out. A lot of the details aren't there yet, but I'm wondering how you see this development, Minister. Is 5G really going to be a game changer in Malaysia? Because if you look at the shape of our economy currently, a lot of people in rural areas or even in suburban areas, even getting 4G coverage is a challenge sometimes. So are we, in a sense, what is your opinion? Are we, in a sense, kind of leaping towards a technology when we haven't really reaped the rewards or made sure that there is adequate coverage and broadband, fast-paced coverage to the entire country first? So in a sense, this is about eggs and baskets, right? Are we going to push very hard on 5G, or is there still this need to make sure that everyone is covered? It was not so long ago that we had all these stories about students having to climb trees to get internet access for their e-learning and things like this. So is 5G really what we need right now, or what is the mix in terms of how we are getting connectivity to people?
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Well, it has to be done in parallel, right? We've announced in the budget as well allocation for the national fiberization plan. It's called Jendela. So that's the 3G and 4G across the nation. That will have to continue to happen as well. You correctly said just now, Malaysia, through a tender process, has selected Ericsson as the provider for Malaysia's nationwide 5G deployment. We aim to launch the 5G by end of the year, especially in KL, Putrajaya, and Cyberjaya. And that is still on track. And then we will aim to launch the 5G services in 5 major cities and districts in Selangor, Johor, Penang, Sabah, Sarawak by next year. Right? So the Digital National will expect to roll out and services to cover 17 cities and rural areas from 2023 onwards. If you look at the 5G benefits, 5G actually coverage stands to create a potential GDP uplift of some 100 billion ringgit and a further 100,000 new jobs by the year 2030. The GDP and jobs growth will be driven primarily by the digital transformation due to the 5G coverage cutting across various industries in the country. So when you look at the efficiency gains and the ensuing economic benefits that flow from the 5G coverage will be key to deliver also the Malaysia's digital economy aspirations as what has been stipulated in the Malaysian Digital Economy Plan. So it will be done parallel, Shannon. That will be continued, and as we build the 5G infrastructure, the national fiberization program called Jendela will also continue at the same time. And when everything is ready on 5G, obviously that will then transition towards total application use, total use of 5G services in the country.
Minister, during the pandemic, being able to make withdrawals from the EPF, for instance, was a key lifeline for many households. But I think going forward, just like the government is trying to embark on boosting its fiscal resources and embarking on fiscal consolidation, are there any plans to basically help those who have drawn down on their EPF to try and rebuild their balances as well going ahead?
Yes, thank you, Selina. We, together with EPF, obviously looking at various measures as the economy reopens, as the economy improves, to assist those who have taken out the money in EPF. It's very important when you look at social security, so talking about safety nets. These are areas that more medium to longer term in nature, which we need to look at the reform part of the budget, and the budget will be a catalyst to that reform. So a short answer to your question, Selina, is yes, we are looking at this. We will be announcing when at the right appropriate time to ensure those who have taken out money from EPF, for example, are able to then replenish their savings for their future retirement.
Is there any further question from you, Shannon?
No, I'm good. Yeah, great
Okay.
session.
Well, then I should say my thanks to you, Minister. You've been very generous with your time and really frank with your comments. We appreciate that. Thank you for all the insights and all the figures and data that you've shared today. We wish you all the best for the budget going ahead. Thank you. And thank you also to Selina for joining us today. Thank you, Selina from OCBC Bank, and Shannon in KL. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Minister.
Bhagia. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Bhagia. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Selina. Thank you for having me.